Hello, and I hope this message finds you well. I greatly enjoyed making my first reading video, my first video of me reading a passage from a book the other day. I did a passage from David Hawkins's Letting Go, and I wanted to continue that train a little bit today. I'm going to read from a very different book, but one no less inspiring to me. Probably my favorite work of fiction is The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoyevsky. It's a large book. It's one of those English major books that no one reads but English majors. Some other notable ones are Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, Ulysses by James Joyce, V by Thomas Pynchon, The Wind-Up Bird Chronicles by Haruki Murakami. We could go on and on. There are a number of books like this where there was one time in my life where I felt like I had to read them all. And, for a sense of clout. And anything less than 1,000 pages was no friend of mine. So Brothers Karamazov kind of has that air about it. Part of the reason I so love it as a novel, and I think this is why it has the reputation it does, is not for its language. Dostoyevsky was Russian, so of course I'm reading this book in translation to English, but I've read that even in Russian, Dostoyevsky's sentences are not beautiful. However, his sense of human psychology is extremely deep, extremely profound. And his world building is on a scale and with a finesse that I've rarely, if ever, seen equaled. That is, to read this book, Brothers Karamazov, is to have the experience of entering a real world. It does not feel like the author is creating psychological projections in the characters, but rather that these are whole people with complete interior lives. And it's a very beautiful and rich feeling to be immersed in such a world. It's easy to get lost in it, taken up by it. And so, as with my previous video where I read from David Hawkins's Letting Go, I want to provide enough context that if you haven't read The Brothers Karamazov, you can roughly understand what's happening in the passage. And then I'll read the passage, again pausing to clarify or paraphrase some ideas in my own language, to my own sensibility. So again, this will be a passage from Brothers Karamazov from late in this book. So what is this book about? In a nutshell, The Brothers Karamazov is about three brothers. They are named Dmitry, who also goes by Mitya. And you'll have to forgive, by the way, my Russian pronunciations. There are names in here, and I don't want to be held to any clear standard when it comes to pronouncing them. Dmitry, or nickname Mitya, Ivan, and Alyosha are the three brothers. And each of them represent different orientations to faith. Dostoyevsky was a Christian convert. There was a period in his life where he found it difficult to believe, and by the end of his life, he was a very devout Christian. And through these brothers, I think he is sort of representing his own struggle to come to faith. On one end of the spectrum, we have Ivan, who is an ardent atheist and has even written a pamphlet sort of seeking to prove that there is no God. And this pamphlet itself is sometimes taken out of the context of the rest of the book and studied, because it's very rigorous and very overwhelming in its arguments. So on one end of the spectrum, we have Ivan. On the other, we have Alyosha, who has kind of a young, exuberant, cherubic energy. And Alyosha is studying to be a monk. Belief in God comes very easily to him. And in the center between these two, but also having his own unique struggles, we have Dmitri, or Mitya. He's a gambling addict. I would also say he's addicted to women, and he's agnostic when it comes to faith. He's more of a hedonist. He's very involved in earthly pleasures. And kind of not yet finding any way to ground himself in the world, lacking that sort of anchor that the other two brothers have, right? Ivan is very certain that there is no God. Alyosha is very certain that there is one. And Mitya, or Dmitri, is just sort of wandering around, running around, often literally running in the book, in the center. So there are these three brothers. They also have a father whose name is escaping me at this moment, who's kind of a cantankerous, gross and sickly man, a loud-mouthed, arrogant man. And the father is killed partway through the book, and each of the brothers in some way or other is implicated in the murder, is a suspect of the murder. And so a great portion of the book concerns the murder trial, to try to convict someone for this murder of the father of the Brothers Karamazov. So that's kind of the premise in a nutshell. Of course, through the book, Dostoyevsky is exploring late 19th century Russia, and modernization and technology and poverty, and faith and all of these, and love, all of these themes, but through this vehicle, through this engine of the story having to do with the murder of the father and the trial, the investigation thereof. Now, I can't read the passage I want to read without giving a bit of a spoiler, which is that in the end, Mitya, or Dmitri, to use his full name, is convicted, is found guilty of murdering his father. And in the passage I want to read, he is visited by his younger brother, Alyosha, who's seeking to comfort Dmitri. And Dmitri explains, espouses to Alyosha that upon his conviction and his sentencing, he's going to spend at least 20 years in this prison, kind of banging away at rocks. He's had an epiphany and he's found God. To me, this is the emotional climax of the book, since, again, as I said earlier, Dmitri is the character about whom there's ambiguity and who is capable of a transformation because his mind is not already set. So to me, this is a highly emotional, a highly moving passage, and again, is sort of the apotheosis of the book. So like I did with my other video with Letting Go, I'll read these few paragraphs from the Brothers Karamazov, and I'll pause to articulate some of the ideas and implications being expressed. So this is referring to Mitya here. Excited, he went up to Alyosha and suddenly kissed him. His eyes lit up. Rakitin wouldn't understand this, he began, all in a sort of rapture, as it were. But you will understand everything. That's why I've been thirsting for you. You see, for a long time I've been wanting to say many things to you here, within these peeling walls. But I've kept silent about the most important thing. The time didn't seem to have come yet. I've been waiting till this last time to pour out my soul to you. Brother, in these past 2 months, I've sensed a new man in me. A new man has arisen in me. He was shut up inside me, but if it weren't for this thunderbolt, he never would have appeared. Frightening. What do I care if I spend 20 years pounding out iron ore in the mines? I'm not afraid of that at all, but I'm afraid of something else now, that this risen man not depart from me. So what Mitya is expressing here is that he's found faith, or rather faith has found him. And his fear is no longer the prison sentence, the 20 years he'll spend doing this drudgery in the mines. It's rather that the faith will vanish from him, that it will pass him by. Even there, in the mines, underground, you can find a human heart in the convict and murderer standing next to you. And you can be close to him, because there too, it's possible to live and love and suffer. He's expressing a very important philosophical or spiritual idea here, which is that physical circumstances do not control our emotional reality, our interior life. Even in this very bleak environment of the prison, it will be possible for him to live and love and experience the full template of human emotionality. You can revive and resurrect the frozen heart in this convict. You can look after him for years and finally bring up from the cave into the light a soul that is lofty now, a suffering consciousness. You can revive an angel, resurrect a hero. Now we're getting a lot of Christian theology and underpinnings here. Convict kind of has a double sense, right? There's the literal sense of having been convicted of a crime, like Mitya has, but there's also the metaphorical sense of original sin or guilt, or being, or having the Garden of Eden stripped from us, being kicked out of the garden, and that sort of suffering that is irremovable from a human being. And there are many of them. There are hundreds, and we're all guilty for them. Why did I have a dream about a wee one at such a moment? Now, this next passage, or these next few lines, won't make sense unless I share a little more context. Upon his being convicted of the crime of killing his father, Mitya falls asleep, perhaps out of being overwhelmed or out of denial, and he has a very strange dream. And this too could be viewed as kind of an emotional climax of the book. Although I would contend that more so it's here because he's about to make meaning of the dream. But essentially he dreams that he's being driven through this strange charred land with all these very poor peasants inhabiting it. And he can hear that there's a baby crying. The baby is cold, doesn't have enough food. And the people around it, the mother holding the baby, they don't have the means to make it warm or to feed it. And Mitya keeps asking the driver, why are the wee ones crying? Why are they suffering? Why is there poverty? Why is it cold? He feels compelled to get to the heart of this issue. And what the wee one and its crying really represents is, again, that irreducible human suffering. Suffering as part of the fabric of reality, of our existence in this plane. Through his dream, Mitya comes in touch with this quality, and he wants to get to the heart of it, and he wants to eradicate it. He acquires through this dream a spiritual mission, which is that he wants to reduce or resolve suffering. So that's what he's referring to when he talks about wee ones in the sentences to come. Why is the wee one poor? It was a prophecy to me at that moment. It's for the wee one that I will go, because everyone is guilty for everyone else. For all the wee ones, because there are little children and big children. All people are wee ones. So again, we can read in this Christian theology, the sense that Jesus died for our sins. That's sort of the mission that Mitya is taking upon himself. He's going to go to the mines and he's going to do this labor of breaking apart the ore for all human beings who suffer. And he's going to transmute and seek to transform that suffering through his labor. We can view it in that way. There's also the notion of interdependency, which is transferable to other religious and spiritual traditions. For instance, there are schools of Buddhism that believe that so long as one person suffers, All people suffer because we are all connected. And so your suffering, in a way, is my responsibility. That too is here. Mitya is recognizing all people are wee ones, spiritually are babies, suffering for reasons they do not know, and it's his mission, as much as anyone else's, to help resolve or reduce that suffering. And I'll go for all of them, because there must be someone who will go for all of them. I didn't kill Father, but I must go. This too is very important. He knows that he's innocent, but for some of the reasons I've described, he also knows that everyone is guilty, that guilt is sort of this inborn condition in this existence, that we are part of this tapestry of suffering merely by having been born, and then made karmic actions within this universe. I accept. All of this came to me here, within these peeling walls. Sorry, 2 pages are stuck together. And there are many. There are hundreds of them, underground, with hammers in their hands. Oh yes, we'll be in chains, and there will be no freedom. But then, in our great grief, we will arise once more into joy, without which it's not possible for man to live, or for God to be. For God gives joy. It's his prerogative, a great one. Lord, let man dissolve in prayer. How would I be there underground without God? Rakitin's lying. If God is driven from the earth, we'll meet him underground. It's impossible for a convict to be without God, even more impossible than for a non-convict. Again, this has a double sense. There's being convicted in the sense of a crime. There's also being convicted in the sense of acquaintance with, understanding of this innate human suffering that all beings share, and this sense of guilt and this sense of duty to help evaporate that suffering through labor. The other thing I want to say about this passage, when he talks about there will be no freedom and yet there will be joy because God gives joy, again, he's showing that the circumstance ultimately does not control our emotions, that through faith there can be joy in even the most seemingly meaningless, mundane labor and the most abject conditions. And then from the depths of the earth, we, the men underground, will start singing a tragic hymn to God in whom there is joy. Hail to God and his joy, I love him. Acceptance, conviction, even a third layer of the meaning of this word. Also, another element I want to bring our attention to is this notion of above versus underground. You might remember the mantra, the meek shall inherit the earth. What does it mean to be underground and yet the most joyous, the most celebratory, the true keepers of the Spirit of God? Mitya was almost breathless, uttering his wild speech. He grew pale, his lips trembled, tears poured from his eyes. No, life is full. There is life underground too, he began again. You wouldn't believe, Alexei, that is Alyosha's nickname, Alexei, how I want to live now. What thirst to exist and be conscious has been born in me precisely within these peeling walls. Rakitin doesn't understand it. By the way, I haven't said it, but if memory serves, that's the nickname for Ivan, the atheist brother, who has told Mitya with absolute certainty that there is no God, nothing to save him from this terrible fate. Rakitin doesn't understand it. All he wants is to build his house and rent out rooms, but I was waiting for you. And besides, what is suffering? I'm not afraid of it, even if it's numberless. What a powerful thing to no longer be afraid of suffering. Because again, he's in touch with a force now which transcends any circumstance. Anything in the world can happen to him, including this, which most of us would agree is a pretty terrible fate. And he's okay. He can persevere. I'm not afraid of it now. I was before. You know, maybe I won't even give any answers in court. And it seems to me there's so much strength in me now that I can overcome everything, all sufferings. only in order to say and tell myself every moment, I am. In 1,000 torments, I am. Writhing under torture, but I am. Incredibly important and powerful declarations here. How does he know that he is? How is it possible to anchor our existence at all, to make it concrete, to ground it? Only through God, only through this larger force that Mitya is now certain of. He's had this transformation. Does the self gain definition? A different way, a different metaphor we could use to portray this is only with the sun, only with the light of the sun, can we see objects through their shadows, through the definition that the light gives them. And he'll use this metaphor too in a moment. Locked up in a tower, but still I exist. I see the sun. And if I don't see the sun, still I know it is. And the whole of life is there in knowing that the sun is. This is a beautiful definition of faith. He no longer needs to physically experience something to know that it is there. That is to say, he knows that he exists and he knows that the universe exists in all of its splendor, independent of his perception. Anything can happen to him at this point. He can lose his sight, he can go deaf, he can have no sensory access to the world, and still he will be able to appreciate it and know it as a gift from his heart, from his soul. Again, this is faith. And part of the reason that it's such a striking transformation for this character, for Mitya, is that he's been a sensualist, he's been a hedonist, he's been a sex addict, he's been so immersed in earthly pleasures. Now he knows all of that can be taken away from me, and still I have an irremovable appreciation for it, which is the same as my appreciation for, my love for God. Alyosha, my cherub, all these philosophies are killing me. Devil take them. Brother Ivan, he trails off. Now, I don't need to read anymore. This passage to me encapsulates, again, the emotional climax, the catharsis of this book. It's something that stood out to me for a long time because through this character of Mitya, Dmitri, Dostoyevsky shows us the possibility of salvation. He shows us the possibility of change from the level of the soul. No other character in this book undergoes such a deep transformation as Mitya does. Because again, none of them is open in the same way. They've already sort of made up their minds. So through his uncertainty, his undecidedness about life, Mitya presents fertility for this sort of transformation, which reaches its completion in this moment. I want to say a couple other things about this. One is that I believe this moment also represents something parallel which happened to Dostoyevsky. If you read into his history a little bit, he was at one point sentenced to the death and actually taken out to be executed by firing squad. And there was some sort of mishap. The guns didn't work, or the order was reneged on, or something like that. He actually knelt, perhaps with a bag over his head, I don't know the details of that, and prepared to die, and then was taken away having lived. And from that moment forward, faith became possible for him because he felt that there had been some sort of intervention on his behalf for reasons he could not discern. So I think that energy of the miraculous and the gratitude that it brings with it is embedded in this passage. The other thing I want to share is that just because we've had this sort of epiphany and this outpouring of emotion that Mitya has in this passage does not mean that it lasts permanently. And if we believe in or feel whatever God means to us, there can be other moments later where we're out of touch with, longing for, feeling forsaken by that same feeling. And this happens to Mitya. We see him a little later in the book, and at this point he's scared. He doesn't want to go to prison. He's apprehensive about, dreading the very same thing that in this passage he said, my soul has the strength to do it for 20 years. Nothing can shake me. So again, I believe this is one of the best novels of all time for all it says about the human spirit, particularly when it comes to faith, love, commitment, conviction. And through what happens later in the book, I wanted to share this last piece, that just because we've felt something so deeply, just because we've experienced this seemingly unshakable transformation, does not mean that we will not continue having struggles later in our life. Our humanity remains. Our being a wee one, a suffering one, remains. And perhaps this is the greatest crucible of faith in the end. So thank you again for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this reading. And if you've never read The Brothers Karamazov, I greatly recommend it. Even knowing what pieces of the ending I've shared with you by necessity in this video, I promise that you will enjoy it. It's so much more rich than just the sequence of its plot. So thank you again, and I hope you have a blessed day. Goodbye.